And here we go again, this time with Act 4 of Macbeth, going over some of the notes. After you have read Act 4, and you may have listened to the recording on our online textbook of Act 4. You may have seen a film of Act 4, and this goes over the notes that I'll be going over in class with the students. So we start out in scene 1 with the witches gathering together, coming up with an evil witch's brew, because they know Macbeth is coming to visit them and he'll want to know some answers, so they're getting ready for him. He doesn't know that they know he's coming, though, but they do. By the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes, second witch says. Pretty bad when these witches, as evil as they are, call you evil, call you wicked, and that's what they're doing with Macbeth. How now, you secret black and midnight hags, what is it you do? A deed without a name. He says, you will answer me, and then he gives them all kinds of threats. He says, I don't care if the winds are untied and fight against the churches. So he doesn't care if religion is destroyed. Though yeasty waves confound and swallow navigation up. He doesn't care if commerce is destroyed. Though bladed corn be lodged and trees blown down. He doesn't care if agriculture is destroyed. Though castles topple on their warders' heads. He doesn't care if the government falls apart. Though palaces and pyramids slope their heads to their foundations. Even all of the past. He doesn't care if that's destroyed. He says, you will answer me. And they say, okay, what do you want? Do you want to hear it from our lips or from the lips of those that we serve? And this man who previously was terrified of anything supernatural says, call him and let me see him. He doesn't care. And so they call up the demons that they serve. And the first one shows itself as an armed head or a soldier with armor on, representing Macduff. Beware Macduff. So his message is fairly simple. The second apparition, supposedly representing Macduff, we don't know how at this moment, but this little kid, a bloody child, says, be bloody, bold, and resolute, laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth. Now that's very strange. Only somebody not born from a woman can hurt Macbeth. So he doesn't think that's anybody. Everybody's born of a woman. So he says, well, then you might as well live, Macduff. I'll not fear you. Third apparition shows up, a little boy representing Malcolm, crowned with a tree in his hand, and he says something also very strange. Macbeth shall never vanquish be until great Birnam Wood to high Dunsinane Hill shall come against him. Now, Macbeth's castle is on Dunsinane Hill. Birnam Wood Forest was in the grove way down below the castle. And this apparition says you can only be defeated when the forest gets up and moves to where your castle is. Well, of course, it takes many generations for a forest to propagate itself all the way up a hill. So Macbeth thinks, they're telling me I'm invulnerable. Nothing can hurt me. Watch out for Macduff, I'll do that. I can only be defeated by somebody not born from a woman, that's nobody. And I can only be defeated when the forest decides to move to the top of the hill where my castle is. And he figures that will take longer than he can be alive for that to happen. And then he says, I want to know one more thing. And the witches say, no, you don't. He says, yes, I do. Deny me this and a curse fall on you. Like they don't already have a curse on them. But they say, okay, show his eyes and grieve his heart. Come like shadows, so depart. And he asks them, will Banquo's descendants really be the future kings of Scotland? And they show a long line of kings and Banquo's leading them. And so, yes, Fleance will live. Fleance will become father to a line of future kings of Scotland. And then the witches disappear. Lennox comes by, and Macbeth says, did you see the witches fly by? And Lennox says, no, my lord, I didn't see any witches fly by. Well, infected be the air whereon they ride, and damned all those that trust them. But Macbeth is the one trusting them the most. He's condemning himself right there. You can imagine what Lennox is going to do. He's going to go back to the other noblemen and say, okay, first he was seeing ghosts. Now he thinks he's seeing witches fly through the air. You know, what kind of a guy have I put on the throne of Scotland? But Lennox does have a responsibility to report news to Macbeth, and he does. It's 2 or 3, my lord, that bring you word Macduff is fled to England. Fled to England? Ay, my good lord. And then Macbeth, in an aside, which means the other characters can't hear him talking to himself, says, I'm going to get back at him. I'm going to destroy his castle, his wife, his children, everybody at his house. Now, he didn't have to do that. We learn in the very next scene, scene 2, Lady Macduff has no idea why her husband left her. We know he's a good guy. He went down south to England to talk to Malcolm. He thought the family would be safer if he did not come back to his own castle. He was wrong. Ross is there. Ross is everywhere. Ross is there trying to talk to her, convincing her that her husband's a good guy and he knows what he's doing. But she's very, very angry at her husband, especially because her children are at risk as well. And so after Ross leaves, she turns to one of her children, a little boy. Siri, your father's dead. How will you live? As birds do, mother. What, with worms and flies? With what they get, I mean, and so do they. Poor bird, you don't know enough to avoid a pitfall. You don't know enough to avoid a trap. Why should I, mother? Traps aren't set for poor birds. My father's not dead. So they have a little repartee going on here, a little sharp kid, and a little sarcastic kid, too. Was my father a traitor, mother? Aye, that he was. What's a traitor? One that swears and lies. Be all traitors that do so? Every one that does so is a traitor and must be hanged. Must they all be hanged that swear and lie? Every one. Who's going to hang them up? Well, the honest men. Well, then the liars and swearers are fools. They're liars and swearers enough to beat up the honest men and hang them up. So the little kid is pretty sharp. And then he says, oh, he's not dead. And if he were dead, it'd be a good sign I'd quickly have a new father. And so Lady Macduff has a very strange attitude toward her husband, too. But a messenger interrupts the conversation. And the messenger, we don't know who the messenger is, says, Lady, you're in trouble. You better get out of here right now. And the messenger leaves. And she says, I don't have anywhere to go, but it's too late anyway. Assassins come in. Most productions have the same assassins that went after Banquo. Where's your husband? I hope in no place so unsanctified where such as you may find him. Now, she can talk mean about her husband to Ross, but don't let anybody else talk about him. And the murderer says, he's a traitor. And the son, you lie, you share-geared villain. And most productions have the little boy running at the murderer, maybe with a little knife or something, trying to stab him. But instead, the murderer takes the knife from the little boy and then stabs the little boy and kills him. But right before he dies, he says, run away, mother, I pray you. And then Lady Macduff and the other children run off stage, but we hear them scream as well as the murderers go after them. Later on, we find out it's not just the mother and the children. A whole squad was sent after this castle, surrounded the castle, killed all the servants, all the soldiers, everybody that could be found within the whole castle precinct. So Macbeth just wiped out that family totally, except for Macduff, who is still alive and down south in England talking to Malcolm. So we have a dry scene here in scene 3. Basically, in scene 3, the two are testing each other. Macbeth has already been sending, we find out, people to talk to Malcolm, trying to convince Malcolm to come back. Maybe to make Macbeth's rule look more legitimate. Maybe he's going to name Malcolm his heir. Probably he's going to get Malcolm back and then assassinate him. And Malcolm's not falling for it. So Malcolm thinks Macduff is one of these guys working for Macbeth. Macduff has still heard the rumors that the boys had something to do with their father's death. Maybe they're working for Macbeth. So he doesn't trust Malcolm. Malcolm doesn't trust him. So to test Malcolm, or rather to test Macduff, young Malcolm makes up some lies about himself. Malcolm knows his country is in trouble. He says, I think our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds, and each new day a gash is added to her wounds. So he knows his country's in trouble. But Malcolm says, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to lie about myself and say all kinds of bad things about myself to see Macduff's reaction. If he still wants to bring me back, he's probably working for Macbeth. But if he thinks I'm not a good king to be, then maybe he's honest and maybe I can trust him with the truth. So the first thing that Malcolm says, yeah, I know Macbeth is bad. He's luxurious and avaricious, false, deceitful, sudden, malicious, smacking of every sin that has a name. But there's no bottom to my voluptuousness, my lust. He said, I'd take your wives away from you, your daughters, your matrons, your maids. I'd have a harem. I'd take all your women away from you because I love women. Now, that's a bad king, isn't it? And he's hoping that Macduff will say, yeah, that's not good. We don't want you as king. But Macduff doesn't fall for it. He says, no, that's a bad trait. Women trouble's been the undoing of a lot of ancient kings of Scotland, but you're still better than Macbeth, and we still want you back. So Malcolm's not sure he can trust Macduff. So he makes up another lie about himself. With this, there grows in my most ill-composed affection such a stauntless avarice that were I king, I would cut off the nobles for their lands, desire his jewels in this other's house, and my more having would be as a sauce to make me hunger for more. I'm greedy. I'd take your land away from you. You remember in an earlier video, I told you that the monarch of Scotland doesn't really own those counties. He's a manager for them. He helps control everybody, but the Thanes really own their own counties. And here he says, I'll take your counties away from you. And Macduff thinks about it. He says, well, that's bad. But Scotland's a big place, and if you want some of our land, we'll donate some of our land to you. We still want you to come back. So Malcolm thinks, okay, that one didn't work either. I'll try it one more time. You know all those good king qualities like justice, verity, temperance, stableness, bounty, perseverance, mercy, loveliness, devotion, patience, courage, fortitude. I don't have any of that stuff. But if I had the power, I would pour the sweet milk of concord into hell, uproar the universal peace, confound all unity on earth. He said, I love war. I would make war all the time. If such a one be fit to govern, speak, I am as I have spoken. That did it. Macduff finally was all he could take. Fit to govern, you're not fit to live. Good. Now Malcolm knows that Macduff has limits. He's not working for Macbeth. He doesn't want just anybody to take over Scotland. He wants somebody good. And then Malcolm says, well, just kidding. I'm not like that. He said, first, I'm a virgin. Second, I've never been greedy in my life and never wanted what anybody else ever had. And my first real lie was testing you just then. I am yours and my country's to command. And if that's not enough to convince you, he says, my uncle Seward, the general of Northumberland, that North County right by Scotland, is going to help me with 10,000 soldiers to help me take my country back. Are you for me or against me? And Macduff says, I don't know what to think. It's hard to reconcile. Then Ross shows up. And Ross, of course, has bad news. He tries to hold back at first, but then he can't. And he has to reveal that Macduff's family's been killed. And Macduff has a hard time processing it. He just can't absorb it. He keeps repeating, you mean my wife's dead? You mean my children are dead? You mean my wife's dead? You mean my children are dead? Young Malcolm tries to comfort him, but he doesn't know the words to do it. Macduff calls Macbeth the chicken hawk who's swooped down to kill all the little chicks, as well as the hen. Macduff says, I'll have to feel this as a man first. I've got to cry about it. I've got to feel it, but then I'll be ready to act. But for now, may heaven rest them. Macduff says, I wish I could play the woman with mine eyes and braggart with my tongue. I wish I could cry and look brave to you, my future king, at the same time, but I got to feel it first. And then I'll go after it. Now, before, this was all political for Macduff. Now it's personal. And Macduff later on will say, if I'm not the one to find Macbeth and kill him, my family's ghosts will haunt me forever. Well, Malcolm likes that. He said, this time goes manly. Come, let's go to the king. That's good King Edward the Confessor of England that's helping Malcolm out. Our power is ready. Our like is nothing but our leave. Macbeth is ripe for shaking. And so now Malcolm with the English force and Macduff with as much of the Scottish force as he can gather together are all going to meet together and go against Macbeth. And that is Act 4.